next presenter is Kathy Kinney. Since studying for a master's degree in museum education, Kathy has continually worked in parks. She's currently celebrating her 10th year at the Dallas Arboretum as an environmental education teacher. Kathy has been a member of First Unitarian since 2003 and now serves on the Board of Trustees. Here to make her presentation entitled I Hug Parks, Miss Kathy Kinney.
Hello. I'd like you to raise your hand if you've been in a public park in the last 6 months. Let me see. Oh, that's great. Good for all of you. Well, I'm here to say that I was inspired by perhaps the most famous park designer, Frederick Law Olmsted. He has been called the father of landscape architecture, really an occupation that he started. And I was made familiar with him through my work at the New York City Parks Department. I worked there for almost 25 years. I started as an environmental educator, then I became an administrator of one of their large flagship parks on Staten Island. And I ended my career with New York City Parks in the planning department, and I was lucky to have an office in the park headquarters on Fifth Avenue in the Arsenal, which is in Central Park. And they had a boardroom there we used for staff meetings outside the commissioner's office. And over our heads at every staff meeting was a huge painting, took almost the whole back wall of the room, hand-drawn. And it was the submission made by Frederick Law Olmsted and Calvert Vaux in 1848 that won them the design to become the designers of Central Park. There were 33 submissions. They were the 33rd, and they delivered it at the 11th hour. It was a long work, evidently, that took place mostly in Olmsted's home in Manhattan. The story is that any visitor, while they were working on it, that came there was handed a small brush, and they had to very carefully paint in the little pieces of grass and the trees and the bushes. It was a beautiful work of art. And as I gazed at that painting and learned more about his ideals for parks, I changed from a park worker to a park advocate. This man thought that parks should be more than just beautiful places, flowers. He felt that parks could have a beneficial effect on people's health, on their mental health, on their physical health. In the 1840s, this was a time when urbanization was starting, industrialization had taken over, the cities were developing hodgepodge, and everything was being cemented over. It was lucky that this big piece of land, and this Central Park stretches from 59th Street to 109th Street, and it's 3 avenues east to west, had been saved. There were things on it, but they also had 2 water reservoirs. So the far-sighted city managers had run this contest, which Olmsted won. And he changed it. His idea of a park was a place that the people in these cities could go. When he submitted his design, he added this quotation: "It is one great purpose of the park to supply to the thousands of tired workers who have not opportunity to spend their summers in the country a specimen of God's handiwork inexpensively. What a month in the Adirondacks is at great cost to those in easier circumstances." He wanted a place for people to be able to get out and experience nature. He called it forest scenery, and he made this park look like a forest. Took the city land that had already been tampered with and changed it. So the people that go into Central Park nowadays think that it was just land that had been set aside forever, that it was the original forest. But indeed, it was all changed. He rebuilt the whole thing. It made him famous. He went on to design many things until his death in the 1900s. He started with Central Park. He went on to Prospect Park, and you're going to see some scenes from all these parks I'm mentioning over my head. These are all Olmsted parks. The Grand Parkways in Brooklyn. He went up to Boston and designed what they call the Emerald Necklace, the Fenway around western part of Boston, providing fresh air, literally. Then up to Montreal, to Mount Royal Park. Down, the Capitol building was being built in Washington, D.C. Olmsted did the landscaping for that. He even included a meditation garden that's still there, that the Congress people can go out and, I hope, meditate. I don't know. I don't even know if they're using it, but I do know it's still there. A good thing. He went across the country to California. He designed Stanford University campus. And then he was asked to design a suburb. This, again, was the time of urbanization, and people had stopped wanting to live in the city and live outside it. The railroads were being built. He designed Riverside, Illinois, again with his idea of woods, curving streets, setback homes. And as a matter of fact, I grew up down the Burlington line from this beautiful suburb. It's a national landmark now. He was interested in private work. He worked a lot for the Vanderbilts. He designed Biltmore in Asheville, North Carolina, and also a cemetery for them on Staten Island, where I worked. His inspiration was a rural background in Connecticut in the early 1800s. He, as a young man, toyed with the idea of farming. He had a farm on Staten Island. He bought land there, and he kind of fiddled with different kinds of plants. And then he traveled. He went to Europe and he saw all the great romantic gardens, the ruins, the curling vines, and he took inspiration from that. You have to realize this was also the time of Emerson and that transcendental philosophy of spiritualness in nature. And he was a follower of Emerson and Thoreau. So he came back, he had engineering, he knew about drainage. He really was the engineer part of Central Park's development. And then he was named head of the Sanitary Commission in the Civil War. And that became the American Red Cross. And it was after that that he designed his first park, which was Central Park. So this man has a style that you get to know as you go into Olmsted's parks. And I give it to you as clues so that next time you go into a big park, you can tell if it's an Olmsted park, and there's a lot of them. He loved to do the curving walks, the forest scenery, the contrived wilderness. In Central Park, you have these sidewalks with bushes and trees around you, and then you might go under a curved bridge with stone, big, huge stone, big boulders on either side. And then you turn a corner, and all of a sudden it all opens up, and there's a huge meadow, a vast, what he called sward. And maybe way in the distance there would be a tree, and maybe not. Maybe there would just be nothing. It would just seem endless. And these were in big cities. This was big city parks. He did that in Central Park, in Prospect Park. He did that down in Asheville at Biltmore. You have a long drive into that mansion. And then all of a sudden you do that curve, and the land slopes down to that huge house, and in the background of the Smoky Mountains. And he did it even in that cemetery, the small cemetery for the Vanderbilts on Staten Island, a short drive. And You come up, you turn that corner, and here's this lawn with a mausoleum on one side and a view of the Atlantic Ocean on the other. So it was his style, what he picked to put in his parks. He wanted them to look like nature, like real forests, that this was being lost in this country. And it's still being lost in this country, and we need these parks. If some of them, like Central Park, is very lucky to have conservancy behind it that raises money. But as you can see from some of these pictures, some of his other parks are not looking so good. And there's always that constant nibbling away at open land as the population increases and we need more roads or we need more development. I'm going to end with Olmsted's own description of his creativity. He was not a modest man. He said, "What artist so noble as he who with far-reaching conception of beauty and designing power sketches the outline, writes the colors, and directs the shadow of a picture so great that nature shall be employed on it for generations before the work that he has arranged for her shall realize his intentions." Thank you. Go Parks.